series about 25 years ago because he wanted to bring great poets to you. We know your days are long, and so then you might not want to go out to a poetry reading, but here it is here. And just a couple of things about the great Edward Hirsch. You know all of his accolades and his awards, and he does too, so I don't need to read them. But I will read this one thing from his memoir, My Childhood in Pieces, a stand-up comedy, a Skokie elegy. Yes, that is what is on the cover. And trust me, what is between here, these pages, you are just going to love. You may not understand them as you are on the young side, but feel free to come and we'll explain it. Okay, so I just want to read this to you. Come in, come in, come in, come in, come in. Come in, come in. Oh, look at this. This is great. Aunt Bee said that Ruby was a bad cheater because he was not good at keeping secrets. She also said that she would kill if anyone said anything bad about him. So, we are going to begin with the reading from Gabriel. So, ladies and gentlemen, Gabriel.
All right. Yeah. Excerpts from Gabriel by Edward Hirsch. The funeral director opened the coffin, and there he was, alone, from the waist up. I peered down into his face, and for a moment I was taken aback, because it was not Gabriel.
It was just some poor kid whose face looked like a room that had been vacated. But then I looked more intently at his heavy eyelids and fine features. He had always been a restive sleeper. Now, he was weirdly still. My reckless boy.
Dressed up for a special occasion. He liked that navy blue suit and preened over himself in the mirror.
"Hey, college boy," the guy called out on the street in Northampton. "You look sharp in those new duds."
He loved the way he looked after he stopped taking the meds that fogged his mind. He admired himself in store windows and revolving doors where his reflection turned.
Now he looked rigid and buttoned up, like he was going to a funeral on a Friday in early September.
Laurie loosened his necktie and opened his top button so I could breathe easier.
His face was waxen and slightly shiny. His skin, grey and papery. Why were there black marks around his eyes, already a little sunken? His nose slightly deformed. A scab where his lip had bled during the seizure. He was still handsome in his fresh haircuts, but something was off. He wasn't moving.
He could never stand still, but now, something that had once been my son lay there. Restless spirit, who left the house one rainy night and never returned. Lost boy, who will never be found again, anywhere but eternity. Uncontrollable fiery youth, who whirled into any room and rented against whatever came into his mind.
The world was unjust to him, and so he hurled his tirades and then disappeared.
He has the Japanese word for music tattooed on one arm and a Jewish star tattooed on the other. It looks colored in with blue crayon. "You shall not make gashes in your flesh for the dead, or incise any marks on yourselves. I am the Lord," it says in Leviticus, but something tribal had taken root and he labeled himself a Jew.
He downed all 4 glasses of wine, and he sold me the afikomen on Passover, but he did not like the high holidays. He disliked Sunday school. He was allergic to synagogues. I never saw him crack a prayer book.
When he was too young to object, Janet dressed him up for pouring, in a black and white shirt, with a sign on his back that said Queen Esther's little brother. He wore a noisemaker against Haman.
I wonder what he would think about the short-sleeved shroud he is wearing under his white shirt. In the casket, I hope he's comfortable. He would have scorned the old Jew we hired to sit with him overnight. Janet didn't want him to be by himself. I'm sure he was annoyed by the prayers. I wonder if he believed in God. I never asked.
He once cut the grass around Emily Dickinson's grave in West Cemetery in downtown Amherst and read me the inscription, "Called Back." It reminded him of going to the cemetery in Houston to visit his friend who was now in heaven. Letty said he experienced the rapture, but Gabriel talked to the gravestone and clutched a reindeer with a yellow bandana.
I wonder if he knelt down and prayed with the family when his friend died of leukemia. Cousins rolled in the aisle speaking tongues. "Jews, stand up to the Almighty," I told him. But mostly, we just skipped out of services and headed to the playground. He was named after Janet's mother Gertrude and the angel Gabriel, strong man of God.
Gabriel,
Gabriel, Gabriel.
Thank you, Day Conservatory 1. So now we're going to have 3 poems by our NYU students. Let's go up there. Go ahead.
It's the right time to pollinate the air and speak to you with an unpolished accent about the terrible, warlike god of love, swaggering through the muddy trenches of lovelessness just to hunt down a bloody scent in the open heart of Guillaume Apollinaire. A count without money, a real no account, wandering aimlessly through the Paris streets, from dawn until dusk, lusting and listing, like a wounded soldier who keeps re-enlisting long after the war has ended in the streets. I followed you so often that I lost count of the nights that mean the most to love. Sweet, tender, pornographic, and passionate. What comes reeling back is how the lightning flashed over the rooftops at twilight, and we clung together, frightened and passionate, until we came apart in the soggy arms of love. Eros and Thanatos are like eternal twins, smutty brothers volunteering for the front, where I smelled the shameless odor of death and dreamt of your nude body, le petit mort, rising up in me like a sudden affront, my lightning, my beloved, my despondent twin. When I think of my sexual misadventures with women who were flares and faulty wires, a cubist, a governess, a teacher, a redhead, I remember peering into an X-ray of my head and seeing a labyrinth of crossed wires that corresponded to my erotic adventures. But when I'm having nightmares about the war and the shrapnel lodged inside my skull, your face alone comes brimming into mind. Like the sun itself and I scarcely mind, you've moved to the inside of my skull, bandaged securely by the Great War. Sit down with a drink of Cointreau or whiskey. Stand up and erect for once, a pole in air. I have something to tell you about kindness. The adored food of love is milky kindness. I may not have become Apollo inerrant or anything French, but poor Kosterwitzki, a bastard zone of uncertainty, a Polish nomad, a clowning, criminal, drunk, critic, Orphic sickness, who oscillates between adventure and order, a lieutenant giving a mortal commanding order, a man who sees life as an exultant sickness, a tragic surrealist driving people mad. But at least I recognized the bright flames of your hair and your funny, scowling lips, and your eyes that looked clear through me, and your scarred hands that will soon bury me. Promise you'll wear a song upon your lips. Come down to find me singing in the flames.
"12 years old and lovesick, bumbling and terrified for the first time in my life, but strangely hopeful. Hopeful too, and stunned, definitely stunned. I wanted to cry. I almost started to sob when Chris Klein actually touched me, oh my God, actually touched me below the belt in the back row of the Skokie Theater. Our knees bumped helplessly. Our mouths were glued together like flypaper. Our lips were grinding in a hysterical grimace while the most handsome man in the world twitched his hips on the flickering screen, and the girls in the front row screamed in the dark. I didn't know one thing about the body yet. I didn't know one thing about the deep foam filling my bones, but I wanted to cry out in desolation when she touched me again. When the lights flooded on in the crowded theater, and the other kids started to file into the narrow aisles into a lobby of faded purple splendor, into the last Saturday in August before she moved away, I never wanted to move again. But suddenly, we were being lifted toward the sidewalk in a crush of bodies, blinking, shy, unprepared for the ringing familiar voices and the harsh glare of the sunlight. The brightness of an afternoon that left us gripping each other's hands, trembling and changed.
She walked through Grant Park during the red days of summer. One morning, she woke up and smelled tear gas in her hair. She liked Big Brother and The Holding Company, Bob Dylan, Sly and Family Stone, the mothers of invention. When Jimi Hendrix played Purple Haze in a jam session, she had a vision of the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee Nation. She dropped acid assiduously for more than a year. She sang, "I want to take you higher and higher," and dreamt of a cleansing the doors of perception. After she joined the Sky Church, I never saw her again. Days of 1968. Sometimes your shutters open, and I glimpse a star gleaming in the constellations. I can almost reach up and snag her by the hand. I can go to her if I don't look back down at the ground.
Hirsch. We good?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was so incredible. I'm a little undone by your reading of Gabriel. I think it's just perfect to have people your age reading the poem about him.
Yeah.
I always wanted that. So that was so moving to me. When I was writing Gabriel, I realized that everything that I had done in poetry wouldn't help me, because I was trying to make Gabriel and his friends sound like poetry. But I realized that what I needed to do was to make poetry sound like Gabriel. And when I did that, the poem began to to flow. And for those of you who haven't read it, what your colleagues were doing was taking sections from different parts of the poem, and each graph is 10 three-line stanzas, and they were alternating the stanzas, so they came in different voices, and that created a kind of chorus that I found incredible. There's another feature in the book that couldn't really come out in such a short reading, but throughout Gabriel is a father's book, the story of Gabriel's life from my point of view. He died when he was 22. It begins, you begin right away with the very first section where the funeral director looks down at his, opens the coffin, because I didn't want it to be a surprise. But also, Joseph Brodsky said about Marina Tsvetaeva, Marina likes to start a poem in high C. That always struck me. I always wanted to write a poem in high C, start in high C too. Well, I'll do that right there. But you were sort of echoing the different parts of it. But there's a thing in the book where I was trying to figure out how to signal that, be true to my own story, but to signal that I wasn't the only one that this happened to. And I began to think about other poets who'd lost children. There are a lot of them in the history of poetry around the world. And so throughout the book, threaded throughout the book, are these poems in the same style as Gabriel, but about other poets who lost children, which is a kind of chorus in the book. And I wanted to read you something. While I was, the whole time I was writing Gabriel, I kept thinking, what's the metaphor for grief? How can I describe grief that everyone feels, that will come to everyone in a different way at a different time? And I was writing this book over a year-long period, and I just trusted sometime it will come to me. And then I got it. So this is the section I wanted to read to you, because it's about grief itself. Well, it's really about what Freud calls the work of mourning. I did not know the work of mourning is like carrying a bag of cement up a mountain at night. The mountaintop is not in sight, because there is no mountaintop. Poor Sisyphus grief. I did not know I would struggle through a ragged underbrush without an upward path, because there is no path. There's only a blunt rock with a river to fall into, and time with its medieval chambers, time with its jagged edges and blunt instruments. I did not know the work of mourning is a labor in the dark we carry inside ourselves, though sometimes when I sleep, I'm with him again, and then I wake. Poor Sisyphus grief. I am not ready for your heaviness cemented to my body. Look closely and you will see almost everyone carrying bags of cement on their shoulders. That's why it takes courage to get out of bed in the morning and climb into the day. I also so appreciated and loved these 3 love poems that you read, different aspects of my work. One, I'm in disguise. The first one as the French poet Guillaume Apollinaire. Not everyone thinks I came up with the greatest, he was Polish, so not everyone thinks I came up with the greatest pun, but I thought it was pretty good. A pole in air. It tells Apollinaire's story, and you read it so beautifully. Apollinaire's story and his crazy, he was wounded in World War I and eventually died in 1918, but he got married right before he died. He always had the pictures of him, all the painters painted him, pictures of him, because he coined the word surrealism. He have a huge bandage around his head. He's a crazy, great inventor of our modernity. And then the second poem, that was so funny. That was so wonderful. That was about my 7th, it's called the Skokie Theater. It was my 7th grade experience with Chris Klein. My mother said, you know, she touches me below the belt. My mother said, what if Chris Klein reads that poem? She's going to be embarrassed. So I said, well, Mom, she dropped out of school. My mom goes, yeah, they're still continuing education. And then, finally, my college girlfriend was like, that was so wonderful, you read about her love of Jimi Hendrix and dropping acid. I played football in college, and she sat next to my parents and dropped LSD. They never understood why she found the game so fun. My girlfriend was just cracked up all the time. Yeah, she thinks football's really fun. I'm going to talk to you about my memoir, but before I do, I want to read you a poem. This is from the last poem in my book, Stranger by Night. And Stranger by Night is about, well, it's about many things, but two of them that are crucial are, one, my going blind, and two, my attempt to get out of the cemetery. Because when someone you love dearly dies, some part of you feels like it dies with them, and you want to go with it. But then you have to decide, do I want to die or do I want to live? And if you want to live, you can't spend your whole life in the cemetery. So I wrote a poem called I Walked Out of the Cemetery, and then the last poem that I'm going to read to you is called Don't Write Elegies, which I thought was pretty funny. I spent my whole life writing elegies. Don't write elegies anymore. Let someone else stumble past the mausoleum and grieve under the calm shade of a plane tree, wiping away the tears of his ex-wife, staining the knees of his black suit, first sobbing, then choking back sobs, comforting others, consoling himself by scrubbing the white stone and weeding the plot year after year. I'm sorry, it's too sad. It's time for someone else to mourn my dead. Though who else can do it? I just need to lie here a while longer, face down in the soil, and then get up and breathe. And that's what I've tried to do, get up and breathe. In 2019, my mother died after a long dementia. She had a terrible old age. Well, she had a terrible last 10 years of her old age because her dementia was so bad. There were some funny things, like once she was in her living room and she thought it was a warehouse. And she goes, there's something, Eddie, I don't understand about this warehouse. So what is it? She goes, why do they have your books? You've always underestimated me. So it was, I mourned for a year, as one does, and then it was the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I was writing a book which I published called The Heart of American Poetry, for the Library of America, about 40 classic American poems. But I had a lot more time than usual because I wasn't commuting, no meetings. I took long walks. And towards the end of the year, I just started writing down things that my mother had said. And it started just, it was literally just writing things. So I'll give you an example of the first thing I wrote. I was 8. I said, you know, Mom, you really shouldn't make fun of me, you're my mother. And she said, don't be so sure, kid. And then I said, remember in high school I was studying the Enlightenment. I said to my mom, you know, I'm studying the Enlightenment, that's the study of universal truth. She said, you want a universal truth? women like shoes. I remember I said to my dad, do you think there's such a thing as common sense reasoning? And he said, yes, you don't have it. And then I remember something my grandmother had said, but this was an anecdote, so I tried writing down an anecdote. I was 7, a girl was going to hit my sister leaning with a broom handle. So I stepped forward to keep this from happening, and her name was Roberta. She hit me over the head. So I ran home, there's blood everywhere. I ran home holding my head, screaming, my brains are falling out, my brains are falling out. So my parents were divorced, my grandmother's taking care of us. She took my sister and me by the hand, she got her purse, she went outside, she hailed a cab, we got in the cab, she said, you don't have the brains you're born with, I don't see how anything can start falling out now. And then I remembered she said, if I had a brain sale, I'd charge the most for yours. Why, because I'm the smartest one in the family? No, because yours have never been used. My father, Ruby, had a lot of sayings, like blood ain't pee, and well, we said we were bored, and he goes, well then go play on Eden's Highway. We go, it's too far. He goes, I'll drive you. We go hit your head against the wall. We go, no, come to think of it, you'll hurt the wall. And he had a lot of theories about food. Like he said, a bagel is a delivery system for cream cheese. And he said, if someone, this was his idea of sociology, if someone orders white bread on a sandwich, you know their family came over on the Mayflower. And his wisdom was, if you tip a guy $1 to the guy behind the counter, he'll give you extra lean meat on your corned beef, but pastrami is better than corned beef and you don't want that too lean. So, like, I started writing down all this shit. It seemed really funny to me. And I began to realize these people are all gone. And their sensibility, which is really harsh, it's really gone. And then this led me to my grandparents. My grandfather, he died when I was 8. My mother said he never knew how to be an American in America. The very first thing is in the book is from my grandfather. It says, all sales are final. God is like my old boss on Maxwell Street, my grandfather said. You may get home and discover that your new shirt doesn't have a back, but you're still not going to get a refund. I realized I could channel this way of thinking, and I started writing my own pieces, like the prologue to the book. My grandparents taught me to write my sins on paper and cast them into the water during the first day of the new year. They didn't expect an entire book. And then the epilogue. Czesław Miłosz says that when a writer is born into a family, the family is finished. And so I began to see what I could do with this. And somehow, this way of writing, all structured as jokes, but not all of them funny, all of them really tight, a setup, a line, a cut, a turn, which is, it's not poetry, but it's poetry adjacent. The Italians have a turn, a phrase in Petrarchan sonnet, which they call the volta, or turn. Like you'll notice the Shakespearean sonnet turns at the end. The Petrarchan sonnet turns after 8 and 6. I realized that that's how jokes work. A joke is a turn. Like I wanted to see, well, what did the Borscht Belt comics, what did that look like? So I looked up one. And the first thing that came up was a woman sees that her house is on fire. She goes, shh, kids, you might wake your father. You just don't see it coming. And I realized that this way of doing this way, it wouldn't all be funny. They would just be, some of them are like poetry, some of them are one lines. Enable you to tell the story of my parents meeting in 7th grade, going to high school together, getting married when they were 20, having me when they were 21, having my sister leaving when they're 22, separating when they're 23, and starting a lifelong war against each other. I have a line about this saying, all their lives they carried the heat of first love plus the rage of early betrayal. And then mixed in with this would be sort of family stories. My mother's younger sister, my Auntie B, this is just literally writing down what she said. I started to sob when I saw you in the nursery, Auntie B said. I'd never seen such a strange looking infant. You were all ears and nose and your face trailed behind. You were emaciated, your hair was spiky. You looked like you were born in an alley. And then I just added family resemblance. All my life people have said that I look like Dee. Or this is a really Jewish joke, so it may be a little much for you, but I once met a man who made me scream. He carried a little black box of instruments and mumbo jumbo into my ear. It was the Moyle who circumcised me. So somehow this way of doing it, I'm 75 years old. I had never been able really to write about my childhood, not fully. And because the idiom that I had in poetry just couldn't do it. And just as I said to you about writing Gabriel, I had to change the way I wrote poetry. I realized that the mode that I had wouldn't work. But this mode, somehow it was like, for me, this is like, about Proust's Petite Madeleine, where there, in Remembrance of Things Past, there's a moment where the speaker for Proust himself, but the narrator, takes a cookie, a Petite Madeleine, and he dips it in tea, and his entire childhood comes back to him. And Proust gives us just the most beautiful description of how the streets of his childhood unfolded, the blocks, the whole world came back. And for me, this was my moment, that this enabled me to tell the story. And then I realized that what wired me up then is that no one had ever written a memoir this way. Like no one had ever written a memoir in these short pieces like this. And so the question is, could you do it? Could it work? And I found that they were addictive because they built a narrative, but it wouldn't work if they were all funny. They had to modulate. Some things weren't funny. And then I ran into the situation where people would tell you different stories. And so you have the way the past works. By the way, if you're going to write a memoir, I highly recommend men having a sister who goes through psychoanalysis. She remembers everything. Plus, she doesn't think any of it's funny, so it's even better for me. So my father, everyone called him Ruby. He and my mom I was 2, so couldn't tell what was going on. Leni was 1. He went to New York. So this is his second wife, Beverly Rubenstein. This is version recorded by testimony according to Beverly Rubenstein. Ruby went to New York to make a side deal on scrap aluminum. He was in the scrap metal business. He had a diaphragmatic hernia and went to Mount Sinai Hospital. My mother got wind of it and flew from Chicago to New York. When she walked into the room, his girlfriend, Anne, was on the bed. She turned around. That was the end of it. Then, version recorded by Arlene Hirsch. The airline called to say that Mr. and Mrs. Rubenstein had made a reservation to fly to New York. My mother knew something was up. She flew to New York. She went to the Waldorf Astoria, where my father was staying. She took the elevator to the 23rd floor. She knocked on the door. When she opened the door, she saw his girlfriend, Pat, lying on the bed. She turned around and left. That was the end of it. So then I write, unreliable narrators. Everyone in this story is an unreliable narrator. Leni and I were too young to know what was going on. The adults were crazed. They weren't even adults. So this is how I sort of piece together things that I don't quite know myself and how I handle it. And this way of writing comically helped me, I guess, back into the trauma. Although right now I'm remembering something really funny. Before I tell you this story, I was doing, my parents were alive and I wrote a book called How to Read a Poem. And I was going around on a book tour, and I was in Chicago and my parents were there. It was in a bookstore. It was like maybe really pretty big crowd, not quite like this, but pretty big. And then my mother, who's like in the back, starts going like this. Geez, Mom, that's really distracting. What's going on? She goes, oh, honey, you're giving away too much. No one's going to buy your book. Come to think of it, I have this thing in my book. I think it's really funny. It's called Literary Correction. And in Literary Correction, it's a motif in the book. It's like, at different points, it's about a poem I wrote about someone in my family and how the family then corrected it. And so this one was a poetry reading I was giving. There's another event, a poetry reading in Chicago I was giving for the MLA. And I read a poem about a science project that I made when I was in 6th grade. And my mother shouted out, "That's not how I remember it." I go, "How do you remember it?" She goes, "Your dad made that project for you." Oh, God, this is so humiliating. So I have this motif all the way through where my family pipes up and corrects something I had written that was very literary, coming in with a harsh voice of reality. So the trauma of my childhood was that when my mother remarried, by the way, we didn't know she had gotten married. She came back and we knew she'd gotten married because she told us that we should call Uncle Kurt Daddy Kurt. Also, but on the other hand, she came home one day with a baby and we didn't realize she had been pregnant. So we weren't that observant to what she was doing. But after my mother remarried and we moved to Skokie, the reason my book is called A Stand-Up Comedy of Skokie Elegy is because at some point in writing it, I realized that everyone is gone. But not only are they gone, the sensibility is gone. The world is gone. These two generations of my older European grandparents who never really adapted to the United States, never learned how to be American, and my parents who were on the hustle. They wanted to make it in the middle class. My first father was in scrap metal, my second father was a box salesman, and they were on the hustle, basically. So when my mother remarried, my father's name was Harold Rubenstein, and my mother's married Kurt Hirsch. And my mother told us, well, we moved to Skokie, we should change our name to Hirsch. It's better for everyone to have the same name. So we just did it. You just do what your parents want you to do. So we did it. And then we brought our report cards to Ruby to show him that we had good grades. And he saw that we had a different name. And he said, "What's this?" And then he started yelling at us. And the next thing we knew, he was suing us. He was suing my mom, and he was suing us to change our name to back to Rubenstein. So we went to court. First, my sister and I had to go to a therapist, and we got evaluated. I think this is funny in the book. My mom said, "The results came back, and you two were totally normal." I said, she could get us to accept some real whoppers, but even we knew that wasn't possible. And so we went to court. I was 10, my sister was 9. The judge called us in, asked us what we wanted our last name to be. We didn't know what to say. Our father's on one side, our mother's on the other. Then they called in my mother. She was gone a long time. Then they called in my father. He's gone a long time. The judge had ruled. And when Ruby drove us back, everyone was crying. He said, "You're not my children anymore. You're dead to me. I never want to see you again." Well, we cried. We said, if you don't want to see us again, we don't want to see you either. So he went home and told his wife, can you believe it? My own kids said they don't want to see me again. So she said, let's move to California. So that's what they did. And we didn't see him again for our entire childhood. The coda to this is, so my mom told us that we were adopted then. My father, Kurt, adopted us, and we had our name legally changed. And when my mom, I guess I was in my 60s, my mom had dementia. She wanted to go to the bank to count her CDs, see what she had. And my wife, Lori, starts looking through the box. She goes, hey, look at this. My mom didn't change my name when I was 10. She changed it when I was 21. Then we were with Beverly, I guess that was late 60s now, and Ruby is dead. She said, you know, Ruby never really lost that court case. What do you mean he didn't lose the court case? She goes, yeah, the judge said he was right, but legally your name should be Rubenstein, but you two were so screwed up that he asked him to withdraw the case. So he withdrew the case. But he was so mad about it that he wanted you to believe that it was your fault. So my sister and I spent our whole lives thinking it was our fault, because in fact he had withdrawn the case. So you see how this isn't where I started. This is where I ended up. And then there's a moment where I say to, my wife calls me Hirsch, because she thinks that all my friends, my family call me Eddie, but she says that's a boy's name. She won't call me Eddie. So she calls me Hirsch. I go, it's all water on the bridge. She goes, yeah, Hirsch, you're still standing on that bridge. And so that's it. And what I'm proud of in the book is it's about my childhood coming to pieces, as you see, but it's also in pieces. And it mixes in a kind of sociology, our personal story with a kind of history of Jews in Chicago. And you know, you just follow, you do what your parents are doing, and so we just follow, but it turns out we were following migration patterns, and there were, in Skokie, where I grew up, there were a lot of Holocaust survivors. So European history seemed far away, but you saw people with numerals carrying bags of bagels sometimes. I said at Kaufman's Deli, you could get a nosh and an insult in 5 languages. And so I kind of moved through my childhood. And I really want to talk to you and hope you'll have some questions, but I want to tell you something that I came to. There's a little piece towards the end of my book. So I grew up in a development where all the houses look alike in Skokie. My sisters and I went on a field trip when I was writing this book. We got a tape measure, so we could tape measure the distance between the houses, 9 feet. And we measured the driveways. People came out from all the houses. They don't know what we're doing. My best friend from high school said, you exaggerate every story. Why would you want to know a random fact like that? So anyway, there's a song by Pete Seeger, which you may know, called Little Boxes. And this song was actually written by Melvina Reynolds. And when I was 18, they released a version of it, which I heard on the radio, called Melvina Reynolds Sings the Truth. And she had written this song while she was driving through Daly, California. And the song is really catchy. It's how everyone lives in boxes, and the houses look alike, and the people are alike, and all their lives are alike. And I realized that I liked this song, but I also hated it, because I thought it was not true. And that driving through a place is very different than living in one. And that I happen to know that everyone who lived in these houses were basically weirdos who were trying to fit in. They weren't all the same. The lives were not the same at all. But on the outside, they could look that way. But on the inside, everything is much stranger, and everything is much deeper, and everything is just more peculiar and interesting than it is. All these ordinary people whose lives are not really ordinary. And so this is one of the conclusions that I come to in this place that I grew up, which looks like a nondescript suburb. But underneath it, these toiling, incredibly strange, wild, harsh lives taking place. And so that was very exciting for me. Then the very last thing in the book, aside from the epilogue, is called Childhood is Gone. My childhood was over. I hadn't noticed. And that's something I want to say to you. Because my writing students sometimes say to me that they don't have anything to write about, or they don't know what to write about. And the history of poetry shows that one of the most significant things that will ever happen to you has already happened, which is you've lost your childhood. You're not children anymore. And that if you look at Wordsworth, if you look at Rilke, you look at Randall Jarrell, and just a whole range of great poets who understand that the world that you move from childhood and the strangeness of childhood is one of the most momentous things that will ever happen to you. And one of the things about my memoir is that, well, as one of my friends said to me the other day, no wisdom here. Most memoirs are filled with psychological insights of people looking back at their lives and explaining what they've learned from experience. My book isn't like that. My book tries to literally catapult you back into the experience so that you experience it the way we experience it, the way children experience it. So you feel like you're going through this thing. And as children, you're just basically subject to what these crazy adults are doing. And you don't understand. And I'm sort of moving through the memoir that way. Just like keep up, basically. Because this is what's happened. And so some of it is serious, some of it is comical, some of it is like just the way they were. For example, I'm allergic to lox, fish. My mother decided every year that she should see if I was still allergic. So the family would gather, she'd get a bagel and cream cheese and lox, and everyone would gather around to see what would happen. So I tried to hide, but it wasn't successful. So I come out, I take a bite, everyone looks to see what happens. I take another bite, my eyes close, my lips swell, I grow out a big rash, I step back from the table, I can hardly breathe. Yep, my mother says, he's still allergic. That's the way I grew up. So, anyway, nice to be with you. What do you got? Can we have some questions?
Yes, go ahead.
I think that you were very funny, and I was wondering what purpose you think humor serves, either in writing or in conversations, and as an add-on to that question, if that answer has ever changed throughout your life, especially after the death of people close to you.
First of all, I would say that marginalized peoples have always used humor to get through the grief. It's the flip side of it. And so every community of people who've been oppressed in one way or another have really dark, funny jokes. So this is just something I do. But I guess what I'd say is that I've always been able to tell a story. And my friends always wondered, and often brought it up, why my stories are funny, but my writing isn't. And I guess I'd say those are two different things. And I didn't know how to do it. It wasn't that I didn't think it was good, I just didn't know how to do it. Until I literally began channeling the people around me. And that enabled me to process it. So one of the things that related to your question, there's an acknowledgement to my sister. I already made a joke about this, but in the back of my book, there's an the acknowledgements to my book are written in the same style as the book itself. And there's an acknowledgement to my sister, Arlene. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because every interviewer on every radio show and every podcast that I've been on has asked me about this, which is odd. It's an acknowledgement. You wouldn't think so. But it says basically, this book is dedicated to my sister Arlene. We share a past and a sense of humor. We went through everything together. But she thinks our childhood was traumatic. I prefer to recall it otherwise. Her way was more expensive and required someone else's. So everyone picked up on that. And the reason they picked up, I think, is they see that they're picking up that a lot of what I'm writing about is really dark, but I'm processing it through humor. And there's another way to process it through trauma, as you see it. So that's intact. But I guess what I'd say in line of what you're saying, there are parts of my book, Gabriel, that are funny because Gabriel is funny. And there are things that Gabriel says that are just so, because he was so outlandish, he'd say really strange, funny things. But the book is an elegy, it's not a comedy. And so that's all in a place. I guess I'd say you don't want to embarrass the feelings. You want things to have the dignity of the grief, the dignity of the feelings, but the two great forms are tragedy and comedy, and they're flip sides of the same thing. In the history of poetry, from every country, there are two permanent impulses. One is elegy, the helping of, in the earlier days, it was the helping of the dead to pass on to the next world. Later, it became a poem of mourning. But there's also the poetry of celebration, the poetry of joy. I believe these are the flip sides of the same thing, the way tragedy and comedy are. And what I mean by that is that there's something that we cannot accept about the fact that we're going to die, that everything we're going to love is going to die, that we're mortal. And the two different ways to handle this feeling about our mortality is one to grieve for it, and the other to hold on to what we've got, to celebrate all the things of this world. So those are the two sides of the same thing. But I'm very relieved that I finally could channel my humor and find a way to tell a story to write my life. So I'm grateful for that. So, plus you get an A because you said I was funny. You're a better scholarship.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Yes, Andrew.
It's a belief of mine that feelings can be simple, but how people experience those and deal with those, that can be very complicated. And I find that poetry is a way of streamlining those feelings, making them digestible for other people. And I see that very clearly in Gabriel. How do you go about streamlining that? How do you go about channeling that into art? Because I've tried that before, and I'd like to know how you're able to do that so masterfully.
It's nice of you to say. Gabriel's a very specific thing, but I guess one thing I would say is I realized early on that I had to make a decision about whether I had the stomach for it. Because I don't think sentimental poems are helpful. And the 19th century is filled with bad poems about people who've lost children. That wouldn't be helpful to me. And so, but in writing this, I realized that I'd say things about Gabriel that Gabriel would not like. And that my ex-wife wouldn't like. Not because they were about her, but because she felt the story should be private and that it wasn't anyone's business. It was just Gabriel and her and me, and we lived through it, and it was no one else's business. But I didn't feel that way because I felt that Gabriel he had a tremendous impact on us, but very little impact in the world. And I felt he would be forgotten. I couldn't stand it. So I guess what I'd say is precision of feeling and accuracy as much as possible. I don't like it in poetry when people goose it up. And they often do. Like, the worst thing in elegies is that people an elegy is often about not just the person who died, but the person writing the poem in relationship to the person who's died. Like, there's this poem by Theodore Rutke I really like called Elegy for Jane, my student thrown from a horse. It goes, I, with no rights in this matter, neither father nor lover. That's pretty good. Like, because normally an elegy for a young person would be the father or the lover, but he's the teacher. Now, it's abnormal for a teacher to write an elegy for a student. It's quite common. It's right for students to write elegies for their teachers. So Rutke is aware of this, but he also he's not a primary mourner. He's the teacher. And so I think that people often overstate their relationship to the person who's died, and that makes the poem go wrong. Or they change the way the person was, the way memorials often do, to make them seem better than they were or nicer than they were. But I think the thing that's moving in a memorial is when people talk about the way someone actually was, their actual quirks, their actual character, and how they were, and you have to see the person sort of come back to you. But you realize not everyone's going to like that. Like, this portrait of my mother is really harsh, but I think it captures what my mother's really like. And so she kind of lives that way. And this portrait of Gabriel is, I think, accurate to the way Gabriel was from my point of view as a father. There is a section of the book in Gabriel where it's actually 2 whole sections, which literally, word for word, are his friend Joe's eulogy at the funeral, in which he told everyone what Gabriel, and he really did, on Gabriel's 22nd birthday. And I had no idea. I had absolutely no, because we took him out for dinner, I thought that was that. But what he and Joe did was go to an ultimate fighting match and take all the money they had and pretend they had more and bet it on the underdog. And they won. And they had $800. And they spent it. And I was just like, at the funeral, I just couldn't believe it, but it brought everyone so much joy. At one point they went to a Chinese wedding, and Gabriel convinced the doorman that they were related to the bride. Because they wanted to try and meet girls. But then when they got in there, they discovered they couldn't talk to them because everyone spoke Chinese. He told the story, and he told how they went to bars and danced on the bars, and they rode on the back of garbage trucks, and the garbage men chased after them with a baseball bat, but they were too fat to catch them. And in the end of the morning at dawn, they had $50 left. And Joe said, "What are you doing? Let's save the money." And David goes, "No, I'm going to go buy donuts." He went and bought donuts and handed them out to the homeless people in Union Square, because everyone deserves a good breakfast. But this wasn't my story. This was Joe's story, and literally, in his words. I wrote it, and then I showed it to him, and he corrected one thing in it. I said, Gabriel had a baby face. People believed him when he told them lies. He said, no. What I said was, Gabriel had a baby face. People believed him even when they knew he was lying. It's a nice correction. What I felt happy about is I had created an idiom in the book that I could include this, and it didn't seem out of place, that I had already created a language for Gabriel and his friends, so that when we put it in Joe's language, it just worked. This is a long answer to your question. think trying to distill something is not what you're trying to do. Trying to be accurate is what you're trying to do. And that means a complexity of feeling in passionate language. This is what I'd say.
I had a question. You had mentioned that you were thinking maybe of making Gabriel into a play. And that was when we thought, well, let's have these different voices. And then you were so moved during it. How do you feel now about it becoming a play, or is that too soon? We need to think about that.
I don't know about a play, but I would love to hear what it sounded like. Because the way it sounded, to me, was incredible. And having the different voices, to me, did not detract. It somehow it created an amplitude. But we just had a very small section. So I don't know what a whole book would need some breathing somehow. To turn into a play means everything has to be in dialogue. So I don't know how I would do that. I don't think I could turn it. But having a kind of choral reading like that, I thought that was great. That was very interesting to me, and it's different than I would have. I would read it, but also each person read it differently. But that brought out the tonalities, and so I don't know. I think that would be just. I'd love to see what that sounded like, and if you find out as you go how much one person should handle. I mean, there are questions you want to ask about how to do it, but I don't know. The sections that I heard, I thought were really moving. I mean, it made me cry. It was so beautiful. I mean, would that be the way I would read it? No. But so what? I thought it was so moving to hear it from these different voices, and I would love to hear more of it, I guess is what I would say. Because I could hear, I don't know if I could see it as a play, but I could certainly hear it as a choral reading with all these different voices. I thought that was really, and then everyone picked up really well, I thought, on what the tonalities of what it was. They must have been selected that way.
We would love.
That would be great.
Let's keep talking, because when I asked the students who would like to be part of this, every single one said they wanted to be part of it. But that would have meant too much time, so we just pared it down to one section, and the other section, I'm sure, was not pleased.
I think that because he's 22, I think that this would be great. I think this would inhabit. I'm catapulting myself back because I'm looking at this from a father. But there's a lot about Gabriel and his friends in this book, and how they behave and all the trouble they're getting into and all their antics. And I think hearing that with your voices, I think that's closer to the experience of how I imagined it. I mean, I'm taking it from my perspective, which is as a father looking back, because I didn't feel I could do anything else. So I can't write Gabriel from Gabriel's perspective. I couldn't presume to do that. But I feel that when these younger voices inhabit it, it kind of creates the texture for us. I found it really moving. So yeah, I'd love to hear more of that. I think I thought it had legs. I thought it kind of worked. I wouldn't have expected it. I thought people would be reading individual sections. But no, even breaking up the sections worked really well. Plus, I want to say something about the reading of the Apollinaire book. I really love it, because I have this book called On Love, and in this book I imagine different figures from the past coming to a symposium on love and giving lectures. And the lectures are insane, because they all sort of say things out of their lives that no one would ever say in a lecture. They're so personal. But the readership found it very daunting, because they were put off by all the names, all the literary allusions. It struck people as too learned. Whereas sometimes I was just like telling my own experiences and like making it sound like it was D.H. Lawrence. So I never understood that. But the reading of the Apollinaire picked that up. It picked up that this is not like the literary figure Guillaume Apollinaire. This is like literally the guy. And it's narrating his experiences inside of what he believed, or at least my reading of that. And I believe that these poems, my own reading on this particular group of poems is that it's a bit like a drag show. Like the way people say it's a dramatic monologue means you inhabit the speaker of the dramatic monologue as if you're that character. I don't think that's what's happening. I think you're supposed to see me behind it. Like that's in a drag show. You don't think the person is actually the character. You know there's someone behind doing this. And that's how I saw it. So I thought people would see that this is personal. But they didn't, because it's so literary. So the Apollinaire, I thought, really picked that up. So that was very encouraging to me. I felt really happy about
And they chose their own poems, and since September, well, we're still in September, the students would bring in a couple of your poems and read them. And so I didn't, as the teacher suggested, I stayed out of it.
Yeah.
And so this is
Good
all
teaching.
Thank you.
Not easy to do.
Yes, I know, yes. You come over here and you do the, yes. But they made their own choices. They
Really
did a
good
great-
ones,
they did
really
a great job.
unexpected.
Mm.
So I just have to reprimand you on not having everyone participate.
Yeah, I know. I promised them
Yeah.
another event, did I not?
Yeah.
I just, I don't know what that is yet, but I know we'll have to bring you back and then we'll do more.
Let's work on it.
Okay. Is anyone, yes, oh, I'm sorry.
Me?
Go ahead, yeah.
Hi. I really resonated with what you said about how marginalized people kind of lean on comedy to heal their trauma, because my parents are also victims of war and genocide, and they
From where?
Cambodia and Laos. And they do have a pretty dark humor at times. It never really occurred to me why, but it just clicked when you said that. I wanted to ask, like, what is your opinion on the idea that funny people always have something to read, or that like hardship is what fuels comedy?
Totally correct. Totally believe it. I mean, I guess I should say there are different kinds of comedy. And there's a more superficial comedy, more slapstick, and I guess I don't think grief necessarily fuels everything that's funny. Some things are just silly. But the deeper comedy, the comedy that, say, Freud liked, the deeper wit, that's kind of fuel. I look forward to the thank you note from your parents because you understand them better now. I'm feeling pretty good about that. I think this is temperamental. I mean, I certainly know people that I think don't have much of a sense of humor. I don't like them much. But there are people like that. But I think that humor, you always feel in a deeper humor that there is a grief underneath. There's good that there's something that's fueling this. And the great comedians, you really feel it. You really see the darkness and the edge under it. So yes, I completely agree with that, and just turn another way and it's tragedy.
Shall we take one more? Is that all right? You had your hand up, yes.
Yeah, this is more on the commercial side of things. I know as an artist, and especially you're from back in the day, so I'm really curious to know how, I'm sorry, I'm really curious to know, how did you manage to, how did you know that, your poetry was something that you could actually turn into a book, and that was something, how did you figure it out, like when you were, I'm sure it must have been really challenging for you.
My sister, she's the only one who's been with me the whole way. She goes, "Can't believe your cockamamie scheme worked out."
So there you go.
Robert Frost Ross speaks of adolescent self-belief. And I guess that somehow you need a belief in yourself before there's a lot of evidence for it. And certainly in poetry, there's a long apprenticeship. I'm not saying I wasn't discouraged at different times, because I was. And the better I got, the more upset I got. Because when I first started, I just thought everything I wrote was really great. But I didn't know very much. And the more I learned, the more difficult it got. I guess I was lucky in one way, that as my poems got better over time, the magazines that I published in got better. But, I could paper the wall with rejection slips. And one of my oldest friends reminded me in graduate school, when we got hired in Pennsylvania Poets in the Schools, and he came over and I had a little table with 3 magazines that I published. He says I had a doily, but I don't. I guess for me, there was a period between the time I was 25 and 30. It was really hard. If you're in college, everyone thinks you're great, you're winning prizes. I got a fellowship, Watson Fellowship, went around for a year. And I went to graduate school. I really didn't know. And I remember that, so then when I was 30, I had my first book accepted. Now it seems young, but at the time it didn't seem that young, because I was struggling to figure out what to do. And I didn't know if I was going to be able to have the life that I wanted. My main thing was not to go to law school. That's what my parents wanted. And I decided to get a PhD, and I remember I was writing my thesis. I was 25, and I was 26 maybe. I was visiting home, and my mother said, "Your father just blames himself." And I said, "For what?" Because he couldn't convince you to go to law school. So they felt that way strongly, and they felt that all through it kind of eased up when I was 28, because I got a job teaching at Wayne State University in Detroit. And then I was 30, I had my book accepted, and then my first book for the Sleepwalkers came out when I was 31, and then my parents started acting as if it were their idea. But I guess I would say for me a huge turning point, I mean there are many turning points, because I had so many manuscripts that took different shapes. But when my second book was accepted and published, I was now 36, I finally began to breathe easier, because I began to feel that I was going to be able to have the life that I had imagined for myself. Before that I wasn't sure. I really wasn't sure. It wasn't just your own poems, but there are consequences for like how you can earn a living and what are you going to do. I mean, I've got to hand it to you. You're like some of the most impractical people I know. Yes. Well, only poets are worse. Don't know if this how to answer your question, except that you try to believe, you try not to get too discouraged. You have to have a taste. You have to be able to handle rejection. I know many people that just couldn't take it, and so they quit, because you're going to get rejected. That's how it is. And so you either can use it to make yourself better, or you can fold. And they just made me mad. And so I just kept getting madder and madder. But I didn't just rail at the system. I tried to get better. My theory was, I think you can see it in my first book. There's kind of a formal, I'd say almost desperation at times. Like, I'm going to show you that I can do this and this and this and this, and I'm going to show you like this. I'm going to like shuffle this and do this. There are all kinds of crazy forms that I made up. It's very overdetermined. But it was like I didn't feel anyone was listening. And I remember my first book, which is called For the Sleepwalkers, I submitted it under the title Fairy Tale for a Whore. No one's listening. No one's listening. I'm going to try and get their attention. There's a poem by that about Gerard Nerval called Fairy Tale for a Whore. And when the young editor finally accepted my book, she goes, we'll be changing the title. And I said, what? No, she said, we're changing the title. It's not negotiable. But the title was, I'm glad I didn't call it that, but I think the thing that was driving the title was my sense that no one was listening. And that it was just going out into the void, and so how could I get anyone's attention? And so I did it by all these kind of literary tricks and trying to show my skill and to try and show that I could do more formally than anyone could do. But it was a little immature. And it wasn't until I could calm down a little and feel a little more confident that I think my work actually settled down a little and I could find something closer to my own voice because it doesn't feel so hysterical. Although one of my friends said that all of my work has a desperate American friendliness.
Wow.
Which is kind of true. Just like me. Anyway, so love being with you. Thank you for the briefing.
Thank you.